Hello, and welcome to the first show of 472 Main, a show that will talk about issues, town departments within the town of Acton. I'm Steve Ledoux, town manager, and 472 Main is actually the address of Town Hall, which is why we're calling it 472 Main. However, our topic for today is really involves law enforcement, which is 371 Main, just for people who are interested in that. But our goal today is to one, meet a new deputy chief for the town, and then talk to Police Chief Frank Widmeyer about some of the issues that are related to the police department. So without further ado, the town has recently hired a new deputy chief. His name is Richard Burrows. He has come from the town of Tingsboro. So welcome, Rich. Welcome to the town. And maybe if you could tell us a little about yourself, your background, and what brought you to Acton.
Certainly. Thank you for the welcome. I worked in Tingsboro for 27 years. I was the deputy chief there for the last 10. I started in 1986. I actually started as a part-time officer. I was going to college at the time for a management degree, and a friend of mine was working part-time in Tingsboro as well. And I told him I had no interest in being a police officer, but I might try being a part-time officer. And after I started working the job, I fell in love with it. And 27 years later, I'm still doing it.
Wow. So what originally did you want to do with your life before being a police officer?
I got a management degree, and my focus was MIS. I wanted to do computers.
Wow, okay. So, you know, people evolve to their jobs in a lot of different ways, and I thought I was going to be a lawyer, so here I am. So, you know, you never know. What's your initial impressions of Acton? What do you feel are some of the big issues that we should be concerned about?
Very similar to the community they came from. Domestic violence is a big issue. Drugs are a big issue, and it's the ongoing battle with those and dealing with those.
Okay, good. Well, once again, welcome to the town. Look forward to working with you, and we're going to take a brief break and be back with you with Police Chief Frank Widmeyer.
The average text takes your eyes off the road for nearly 5 seconds.
Welcome back to the show, and with me now is Police Chief Frank Widmeyer. Welcome, Frank, to our initial program of 472 Main.
Thank you.
Sure. Glad to have you. Frank, would you tell us a little about yourself? How long have you worked for the town of Acton?
Actually, 36 years in the town of Acton, 40 years overall.
Okay.
In police work.
Okay. How long have you been police chief?
13 and a half years.
13 and a half years. It's very impressive at this day and age. Why did you choose law enforcement as a career?
Well, as a young boy, I was always interested in it. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I had a number of relatives who were in the New York City Fire Department, from firefighter all the way up to battalion chief. And after I moved from New York, I went a few other places, but I wound up in Acton when I was 13 years old. At one point in high school, I think it was 10th grade, an FBI recruiter came to the high school at AB and talked about hiring people as agents. At the time, I was interested in forensic work. And then later on, after I went to college, decided to go right into law enforcement at the local level instead.
So, wow. So, did you ever think that you would end up being the chief in your hometown?
I always had that goal in mind, so I would have to say yes.
Oh, I never wanted to be town manager in my hometown because I know too many people that could either be good or bad. Now, given your length of time in town and your 13 and a half years as chief, what are the major changes that you have seen in law enforcement?
Actually, there have been quite a few. Computerization comes to mind. Emergency 911 systems, which came in 1995. Female police officers were something new. College-educated officers came on board around the time that I started my career. Community policing strategies and laptops in the cruiser, that kind of innovation. So there have been a lot of changes. Those are the advantages. The disadvantages are things like budget cuts and staffing shortages.
Okay. And we'll be talking a little about that in a few minutes. What are the current challenges that you see affecting your department on a day-to-day basis?
We have a lot of domestic violence for a town of our size. We have house breaks as a result of drug abuse, which seems to be hitting our community much more now that it's been spreading for a long time, and I've been seeing it now. Now it's really hit us. And mental health issues, we deal with that quite a bit.
In terms of domestic violence, I mean, I think the average citizen would think that Acton's kind of a quiet, upper middle class town. What do you feel are the causes for domestic violence?
Well, there are many actually. There's so much stress on people these days with the economy that I believe that is a major factor. Substance abuse plays into it in a dramatic way, and it's just so much more common than it ever was.
Okay. In your in the budget that's going to town meeting for this April town meeting, we have an initiative of 4 new police officers, and I know you have felt for quite some time that the police department has been understaffed. And we're going to show the folks some PowerPoint slides that were part of the chief's budget presentation to myself and later to the Board of Selectmen. So maybe as you said, the department has had difficulty keeping up with things because of budget cuts in the past. Can you give us an example of some of the service losses that have happened over the last few years that have been caused by budget deficiencies?
Yes, if you look at the first slide that is up, you'll see some of the things that we've done away with over the years, and whether they come back or not is really dependent on staff and funding. You'll notice things like national accreditation, vacation house checks, motorcycle patrols, West Acton foot patrols, crosswalk enforcement, or extra crosswalk enforcement, I should say, and one of the evening patrol officers that we had assigned to help with the schools. You'll see the list shows the rest of the minor ones, but that's pretty much what our situation is, and it's been getting worse over the years.
And for the viewers, for example, what is national accreditation? Why is it important for the town to think about national accreditation?
Well, it was something we did in 1992 under the previous administration, and it was standardization for how you would be received and treated in a police department. And it's supposed to be something that is done on a uniform basis across the country. So it was a good thing to do. I mean, we still follow the rules and the procedures, but we no longer have the designation.
Yeah. And my understanding too is it does have a positive impact on insurance rates and things for the town as well to have accreditation. At least that's what I'm recalling from my previous community.
That's correct, yes.
As we, the town has, I guess what I'd call a market basket of communities that we tend to compare ourselves with, either because of population size, type of community, budget, demographics, et cetera. Could you talk a little about, and the communities we use, just for the folks at home, are Maynard, Lincoln, Littleton, Boxborough, Concord, Westford, Stowe, Hudson, and Sudbury. Could you talk a little about how we compared with them in terms of size of department, population, things like that?
Yes, if you look at the slide, it shows population density, which I feel has a major effect on policing in a community. And the ratio of officers per 1,000 residents is generally assumed that it should be about 2 per 1,000.
And that's a national standard?
That's a national average for the Northeast United States, with communities between 10 and 25,000 population.
Okay, so we're not comparing ourselves to, that ratio doesn't compare ourselves with a Boston or New York or anything like that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And the goal is 2, in my mind, which means we should have 44 officers because the town has 22,000 people, and we currently have 1.6 per 1,000. So my goal is to get that up. The other thing to keep in mind is that on an actual basis, we're always down officers because of illnesses, injuries, wars, and veterans going overseas. So we generally come in around 1.36 when we're down 4 to 6 officers on our existing staff. So that's really a major problem for us.
And folks also should know that even though you get an authorization to hire somebody, or somebody has left or retired, it takes quite an amount of time to actually have a police officer ready to fill that slot because of police academy, civil service rules, and all that.
Right. It's generally about 9 months.
Right. So for the viewers, it does take a while if the chief has a vacancy. In terms of our comparable communities, how do we compare with them in terms of crimes and crime rate, et cetera?
Well, if you look at the slide, crimes by community, you'll see that some of the towns that we compared ourselves to in 2011 were about in the middle. The best comparison, in my opinion, is the town of Westford. We're very close to them. Population is almost exactly the same, and our crimes are very close. So I think that if we were where Westford is, we would have 8 more officers than we have right now.
Yeah, and having come to Acton from Westford, I mean, part of the difference in Westford too is their upper officers. They I think have 4 lieutenants, 2 captains, and a deputy chief along with the chief. So they've also administratively have a higher number of officers. You had talked earlier about domestic violence and how that's a growing concern. How do we stack up with our comparables on domestic violence?
We're always at the top end of the scale. You'll notice that there are different towns on the list. That's because the consortium that we belong to, called the Domestic Violence Victim Assistance Program, keeps statistics on all the towns that we deal with, including Hanscom Air Force Base, which is in our group. You'll notice that Acton is at the top, and we actually are almost double a town like Lexington. And you can see from the stats where we are, and it's very disconcerting, and it's something we spend a lot of resources trying to stop or help people who are victims of domestic violence.
Yeah, and I think also what's interesting is I think a lot of people, I think there's an assumption that domestic violence may happen in lower income communities, but as you can see from the list, Lexington and Concord have a significant amount of domestic violence incidents as well. So it does seem to be a growing trend, and something that I know you're very concerned with, and I know all the officers in the department are very concerned with as well.
Correct.
You talked earlier about the impact on budget cuts within the department, and I know you've got some statistics that show how we rank statewide in terms of municipal spending. Could you talk a little about that?
Right. If you look at the towns that we compare to on a general basis, you'll see that we rank at the bottom in per capita spending by communities on their police services. And these numbers I used came from the Department of Revenue. So we're at the bottom of the list, basically, and that is problematic for me. You can see that there's a slide with the numbers and a slide with the graph. Over the years, I think that's become an issue, and we need to deal with it.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and I think it's the time is really come, and I think when you look at some of the nationwide incidents, things like the unfortunate tragic shooting in Newtown, I think it brings public safety readiness way up to the forefront, and something that I know a lot of our citizens are very concerned about. So I know you have a slide, Frank, that kind of shows where you would be if you're approved at town meeting, and it still compares with how your department has grown, and that would actually get us to the 1.8.
Right. The slide that you're looking at is where we've been for the last 10 years, from 2002 on, and it shows why our full-time police officers per 1,000 doesn't really increase because the population keeps going up as time goes on.
And I think one thing this slide shows, and it's to make viewers aware and those that will be coming to town meeting on April 1st, that if you look at that chart, 2015, your goal is to add another 4 officers the next budget cycle, so you would have 8 new officers over the next 2 years.
That's correct.
Talk a little about, I know we talked about per capita spending on police. I think you have a chart that kind of demonstrates that with our comparable communities.
Yes, if you look at the slide, it's labeled Town Spending on Police. You'll see that where Acton is, again, at the bottom, per capita, and it shows the police budget for each community. And then there's a graph that explains the same thing. What happens is that I took the average of all those communities and figured out what it would be if Acton were at the average, and if that were correct, with an officer with benefits cost as shown, that we could have hired 18.7 officers and still met the average for those communities in per capita spending. So Acton spends a lot less than their comparable towns. And again, those are DOR numbers.
Okay, and is that what this existing Acton cost chart speaks to?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So, I think over the years the town has tried very hard to have been a lot of pressures on the budget, and I think the police department has certainly been an area that has suffered because of trying to meet kind of the limitations that we have to face with Proposition 2.5, decreasing local aid, and things like that.
That's correct. Since 1990, the directive has been basically do more with less, so we've been operating under those guidelines.
So if town meeting approves the request for 4 new officers, how will you be utilizing the officers? How will they be utilized to address, say, for example, the domestic violence piece that is a growing concern?
The primary purpose is to get more officers on patrol, cover the north side of town better, which used to be a lot of farmland. Now it's mostly condos and apartments. Huge residential increase on that side of town. Because of that, domestic violence tends to go up. It's not that it's more prevalent in apartments, but the fact that we'll find out about it more readily because people will hear an argument and report it. So there's that aspect to it. But generally, and in apartments, you get more of a transient population, people coming and going all the time, so you get quite a mix. But, what was once farmland is now full of people, and that means we have to go there and service that population very frequently.
Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit because you are requesting another position at town meeting, and I should say both you and the fire chief are requesting it since you both share the dispatch responsibilities for the town. But you are requesting a lead dispatcher that I have put in the budget, and the selectmen have also approved as they voted their budget recommendations a couple of weeks ago. Could you talk a little about what the lead dispatcher will do, what it will bring to the town in terms of our ability to respond to emergency calls?
A lead dispatcher is sort of in between a management supervisor and a dispatcher position itself. It's someone who is there to help out when it gets busy, so we won't have to call another one in on overtime. It is also a position where the person could do our administrative tasks that are now being done by police lieutenant and deputy fire chief and the two police chiefs to a degree.
And I know you have some information. It's a 3-year average of the emergency, the 911 calls that the dispatch center has received, and clearly we receive significantly more calls than our comparable communities. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, because Acton is a big community, it's sort of the hub for a lot of the area. The 8 towns that you see were compared in a regional dispatch study that we just completed with those 8 towns to determine whether we could put something together on a regional basis, and Acton is at the top of the list with the 911 calls, as you can see.
Let's talk a little about the regional study because there's certainly, from the governor's office, been a lot of discussion that cities and towns ought to be doing more things regionally, and the study looked at basically all the towns that are on that chart, and if memory serves me, recommended like 2 or 3 regional dispatch centers, with Acton being one of them. Is that correct?
Yes, and there were several scenarios, and I've been involved in many studies over the years. What they recommended specifically was either one big one for great expense or splitting up towns into groups of 2 to 4. And one option utilized the town of Acton dispatch center as a regional component, which we designed it for when we built the building. The problem with that is that other towns don't want to give up their dispatch operations, and there are some reasons for that, including the fact that there would be no one in their station when it was at night and there was no one staffed there. So there are a lot of factors for why it never happens, and these studies continue to go forward, but very little resolution.
What do you think would be entailed to make a regional effort happen and succeed?
You need probably the political influence from the town selectmen or town managers or both, and a will to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, and I've worked in Massachusetts for quite a long time, since 1984, and I've worked in New York State, and I've worked in Michigan, and and maybe it's because we're an older part of the country or whatever, but people do tend to think in terms of towns. Regionalization is, for whatever reason, a very, very difficult concept to get by. I mean, I think it's getting a little more prevalent now. I mean, we have the example of for our advanced life support, our paramedic service, we have formed a regional entity with some of the same communities that are on the list here. So maybe that's going to be the start of maybe a little more success in dealing with the issue of regionalization. But I agree. I've seen other regional studies as well, and they do tend to not go anywhere, and it does take a lot of political will to make that happen.
Right, and not only can it be done, but we've done it with the fire department. In 2005, we brought the fire department into that facility and brought dispatch with it. That enabled the fire department to put 4 more firefighters on trucks.
I don't know, and some of the towns that are in the study, I know they were in a situation like we were prior to '04, where they have uniformed fire personnel dispatching for fire, and I know probably every chief in those towns would love to dearly put those officers on apparatus, and for whatever reason, they get bogged down with politics or maybe even union issues. I'm not sure. With the time that we have left, Frank, I know everybody's concerned about crime. Obviously, there's a big thing now about guns, etc. Do you have any tips you could tell the citizens on how to stay safe or safer, given this kind of uncertainty of that we live in right now?
Well, I do have some recommendations. Since last spring, we've had a fairly large increase in house breaks. I think it's over 50%. And we would like citizens to call us if there are any issues. Alarm systems are recommended, but remember that if they are false alarms, you may get charged for them. So you have to keep that in mind. But we really hope that people, if they keep an eye on their neighbor's house and see something suspicious, that they would call us. They will not be bothering us, and we'd be happy to check it out. And as far as emergencies go, our website for the town has some good information and links on how to prepare for a storm such as the blizzard we just had this weekend.
And I remember you saying several times at our staff meetings as well that it's amazing that folks don't take perhaps better care of some of their personal stuff. They leave their cars open with GPSs, iPods, computers even, and those things tend to sometimes disappear if you don't lock
Right.
your own vehicles.
The vast majority of our breaks into cars are unlocked cars, and there are many people around town who still think that they don't need to lock their houses. That is really something I frown upon, and I say so when I talk to people who mention that.
Well, I guess we're not in Mayberry anymore. I'd like to thank Chief Widmeyer for being on the show, and after a short break, we're going to come back with a couple of our police officers to talk about issues related to the schools and school safety. We'll be back shortly. Thank you.
I got no balls for losing.
Sorry, he's in Mayfair.
Shocking drugs at road all the time. Just had a few drinks. This can't be happening.
Are we clear?
Clear. We just buzzed. Just buzzed. You didn't tell us that, sir. You're right. This isn't happening. You'll be fine.
I feel good.
Really? No, not really.
Buzz driving.
Clear.
Maybe we should stop acting like it's no big deal.
Shocking.
Hello, and welcome to 472 Main. I'm Steve Ledoux, town manager here in Acton, and once again, this is a show that features some of our town staff and talk about issues that relate to the town of Acton. We're going to continue on our theme of law enforcement within the town of Acton, and today we have Officer Keith Campbell, who's one of our school resource officers, and we also have Sergeant John Cooney, who's our if I get this right, John, active shooter response trainer. So thank you, gentlemen, for being on today. And maybe we'll start off. And Keith, why don't I start off with you? How long have you worked for the town?
Well, I've been with the police department since 1998. I started 2 years as a dispatcher, and the rest have been as a patrol officer.
And why did you choose police work as a profession?
Well, it always interested me in the past. In high school, I took a class called You and the Law at the high school. Got into the criminal justice aspect, and always wanted to work kind of outside directly with people. So you certainly get that opportunity.
And where'd you grow up?
I grew up here in Acton.
Correct. So,
yep.
Another AB alum like the chief, huh?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So, a few years later, though.
Yeah, a little more than a few, I'm sure. So John, how long have
Yes.
you worked for the town?
I've been a police officer in Acton for 25 years now.
Okay. Okay, and what made you choose law enforcement?
Just ever since I was little, that was all I was interested in. I wanted to be a police officer.
Wow.
After graduating high school, I joined the Army National Guard in a military police unit. That was 7 years. Then I was hired in Acton.
Okay, and where did you grow up?
I grew up in Acton.
Oh wow. Okay, another alum. That's right. I think that's really neat that you guys you have goals when you're younger and you're able to fulfill them, and even in your hometown. I think that's really neat. Keith, why don't we talk about the school resource officer and talk a little about how long you've been doing that?
Sure. All right, I've been a school resource officer since 2004. So I've seen a lot of kids come through the system and go on to graduate. In that role, it's really multifaceted. It could be a different thing happening each day. My main goal is to keep the campus safe, but also work with the students and the staff to make sure that we're identifying problems and working with kids who might need a hand, whether it's through counseling or through, we have restorative justice and those kind of things to make sure that we're keeping kids on the right track. And it's a big campus. At the high school we have 2,000 students, the junior high another 1,000, and we have another 4,000 kids at the elementary level. So there's a lot of stuff that can go on during a day-to-day basis. So.
And are you primarily at the high school?
Yeah, I switched my time between the high school and the junior high, and Detective Sullivan, Tricia Sullivan, she works at the elementary schools as well as the 2 alternative high schools we have here in town. Mm-hmm. So it's enough to keep us quite busy. So. Mm-hmm.
Do you find the kids welcome you on campus? They're able to open up to you, talk about issues?
I think it's funny because when I think back to when I was in high school and you'd see a police officer, you kind of
would run the other way.
What's he want? Now
Exactly.
it's more as if I'm just a part of the school staff, and I've had kids come up to me to ask about situations that they might have gotten into, or ask to how best to help out a friend who might be in in a problem with substance abuse or that kind of thing. So it's that's what I welcome.
Mm-hmm.
All that kind of thing is that's the whole point of the position, is to make sure that I'm available to the students as well as the staff, and to make sure that the kids are on the right track.
So do you feel you've been able to nip some situations in the bud because of your presence at
Yeah, absolutely.
campus?
What we do, we have a memorandum of understanding with the school. So anytime we have a situation that might happen on the weekend, I know whether it's a domestic violence issue or an underage drinking issue, whatever it is, I can bring that to the school to see if that student needs a boost from the school staff, whether it be through counseling or that kind of thing. So identifying those problems, and then the school will do the same with me, so we can have a heads up about what might be taking place in someone's home, or a potential party that might be happening that they hear about in school. So we share that information back and forth, and I think that's really one of the more important parts of the job, is to do that. Keeps us both on the same plane, and making sure that the kids are have a voice. So.
John, in terms of your role as active shooter training program, talk a little about what you do, what that entails, what kind of training happens for the active shooter thing.
Well, both Sergeant Dan Silva and I are the police firearms instructors for the town of Acton, and over the years we've been integrating active shooter response into that. Our most recent certification was back in November. We went to a 3-day course put on by the National Tactical Officers Association, which certified us as instructors for police response to active shooters. So as we train for the active shooter program, we integrate, like airsoft guns that the kids have, we use more modern looking airsoft weapons, since we obviously can't use live ammunition doing force-on-force training. We have officers that use airsoft pistols and suspects that use airsoft pistols with the proper safety equipment. Last year we had training inside the schools when there was no school in session. We brought officers in as an active shooter response. We had them going through the schools, clearing the rooms, looking for the active shooter, and then engaging the active shooter. If we had an actual active shooter event, the officers are trained to move towards the shots. Unfortunately, in an active shooter situation, you're going to have victims, whether they be students or teachers, lying injured on the ground, and the officer's first response would be to render aid to them. And if they're rendering aid to them, the active shooter is still loose in the building somewhere, the officers are trained to ignore all the injured parties and move toward the shots. Their first goal is to take out the active shooter before any more innocent people are injured or killed. Then the follow-up officers are rescue teams coming in with the fire department and paramedics to rescue the wounded people.
You think there's going to be any change in training or protocol because of the Newtown situation?
Well, the active shooter response is constantly evolving, and we haven't even heard the final report on Newtown, but that will have an effect on how we train. We just have to see the final report on that.
Because I think what's, I've certainly been in schools that have, security where you have to hit an intercom to be let in, and even in Newtown, I guess that was the situation. That really didn't.
It sounds like it was, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, kind of switching back to you, Keith. What kind of issues, trends are you seeing as a school resource officer with the kids particularly?
Well, I think for the most part, there is a substance abuse issue. We've seen an increase in marijuana use, and I think a lot of that sometimes has to do with the changing of the laws. I think it's become more socially acceptable amongst adults, which obviously has a trickle-down effect to the student population. So we're dealing with that. A lot of times you hear about the argument back and forth of whether marijuana is a gateway drug and that kind of thing, and it might not be for some kids, but it is for others. And so we're constantly working with those kids to make sure that they're in a situation where their health and safety is paramount. But getting back to the active shooter drills and that kind of thing, one of the things I also stress highly is that we might have an opportunity to identify a potential suspect based on our memorandum of understanding and that kind of thing. So, I think the FBI studies on mass shootings like this have indicated that there's always been an opportunity. Most of the time, a red flag has been raised prior to the actual event happening. So that's some of the things we're doing. And it's not just a student coming to the school. It could be an irate parent in a divorce situation or something like that. So you really need to be prepared in terms of identifying those problems that might be happening outside of the school that the school might not be aware of. So.
Absolutely. What steps? I know, John, you talked a little about the training with kind of the cushy bullets and things like that. What other steps has been the town undertaken to kind of better able to deal with the situation if we ever got into an active shooter?
Well, we do have other equipment that would be used during a response for that type of incident, ballistic shields and so forth. Some of the planning we do is not the type we like to publicize.
Absolutely.
Because anybody watching that planning an active shooter incident would know how we're going to respond. So we try and keep some of that more confidential.
Absolutely.
But we do have equipment to respond, and we do have officers trained to use that equipment.
Absolutely.
And just to add to that, school by school does their own safety plan. Obviously, their staff needs to be prepared because there could be a 3 to 4 minute police response. So, just recently, as a result of the Sandy Hook incident, we've taken a step back and look at what's working, what might need to be tweaked, and so that's both at the high school, junior high, as well as the elementary schools. And the superintendent has also formed a committee to examine the overall approach, whether there's a need for new equipment, cameras, those kind of things, so that we're better prepared for the staff itself to handle that.
Yeah, and just watching all the news and all the reports on Newtown and Sandy Hook, it seemed like some of the faculty, their fear was they really didn't have a good place to hide or a good place to hide with the kids. And then I heard something on NPR fairly recently that now there's maybe for the teachers and even the kids, a new approach is like throw stuff at the shooter, do anything to like distract them and things like that. So there's a lot of new theories or different theories coming out.
Yeah, so we've actually we're trying to streamline all because we have so many different buildings. Obviously, different buildings have different architecture and exit points and that kind of thing. But we're trying to streamline it so that the police response is going to be consistent throughout each school and that kind of thing. So.
Okay. Well, good. Well, I appreciate you gentlemen for being on today, and keep up the good work. I know it's I think being in the schools is really important, and getting to know the kids, and hopefully by building up trust, we can solve some issues before they occur big time. And John, I think the active unfortunately we live in a day and age where we have to be prepared for these these unfortunate incidents, and you know, keep
Nobody
up the
wants
good
to
work
think
on
it's
that.
going to happen in their community, and
Exactly.
unfortunately, history has shown that that's not the case.
Exactly. Okay. Well, thank you, gentlemen, for being on, and I'd like to thank our viewers for tuning in to 472 Main Street, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.